The penthouse smelled of lemon oil and money, the kind that didn't announce itself but simply existed, heavy and inevitable as gravity. Helena Banks moved through the silence like a ghost, her cloth whispering across marble surfaces that cost more than most people earned in a year. 6 months she'd been here. 6 months of invisible hands, lowered eyes, and a bank account that grew steadily toward freedom. She didn't think about the rumors. Didn't let herself wonder about the men who arrived at midnight with briefcases, or why certain rooms stayed locked, or what exactly Enzo Porro did to afford 17 bedrooms on Central Park South. She thought about the number, $47,000. Almost enough, almost time to disappear. Before we go deeper, tell me, where are you watching from and what time it is there? Make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. The storm had been building all afternoon, turning the October sky the color of old bruises. Helena was finishing the private study always last, always just before Mr. Porro's evening meetings when she heard his footsteps in the hall. Too early. Her pulse kicked. She was still inside, still visible, the vacuum cord snaking across Persian silk like evidence of her existence. The door opened. Enzo Porro entered without seeing her. Men like him never really saw the help, and she froze behind the massive desk, calculating. The service door was 12 feet away. She'd never make it without drawing attention. So she did what she'd learned to do best. She became furniture, statue still beside the bookshelf, barely breathing. Porro moved to the window wall, all glass and vertigo, the city sprawling 47 floors below. Lightning flickered in the distance. He pulled out his phone, and Helena's mind screamed at her to move, to excuse herself, to do anything but stay. But her body wouldn't obey. Sometimes fear paralyzed you in the worst possible place. "We have a problem." His voice was silk over steel, the kind of voice that gave orders without raising itself. Marchetti's threatening to talk. "I need this handled. Tonight." Helena's hands went numb. She pressed herself flatter against the wall, praying the shadows would swallow her. The storm chose that moment to break. Rain lashed the windows in sheets, and thunder rolled across the sky like God clearing his throat. Porro stood framed against the glass, utterly exposed, utterly confident. Men who owned penthouses like this one didn't think about vulnerability. They thought about power. "I don't care about complications," he continued. "I care about silence. Permanent silence." Outside in the hallway, Helena heard it. A small sound. A throat clearing. Nervous. Wrong. She'd worked here long enough to know which footsteps belonged to which men, and Andrea missed her. Porro's driver. His shadow never waited in hallways. He materialized when summoned and vanished when dismissed, efficient as death. But tonight he was waiting, and he was afraid. Helena's hand found the silver tray on the sidebar, the one she'd prepared earlier, crystal tumbler sweating with ice water that Mr. Porro never drank but always demanded. Her fingers closed around cool metal. She didn't decide to move. Her body simply understood what her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Staying invisible meant staying alive, and staying alive meant acting. She stepped forward, each footfall silent on carpet that cost more per square foot than her childhood home. The tray balanced perfectly in her grip muscle memory from 1,000 invisible services. Her reflection ghosted across the dark windows as she approached, a specter in a gray uniform that might as well have been a camouflage pattern designed specifically for wealthy interiors. "Your water, Mr. Porro," she said, her voice the practiced whisper of good help. He didn't turn, still on the phone, still backlit by lightning, still utterly exposed against that wall of glass. She drew closer, and the storm's next flash illuminated everything with white-hot clarity. That's when she saw it. A red dot. Small as a ladybug, steady as a heartbeat, right there on Enzo Porro's forehead, reflected in the rain-streaked glass like something from a nightmare trying to cross over into the waking world. Time didn't stop. Helena had never understood that expression before, but it stretched, pulled taffy thin, each millisecond expanding into its own small eternity. The dot didn't waver. Somewhere out there in the storm, in one of 1,000 dark windows across the park, someone was looking through a scope. Someone's finger was taking up slack on a trigger. Someone had been paid to make Enzo Porro stop breathing. A shout would be useless. The words would still be forming in her throat when the bullet arrived, faster than sound, faster than thought. Her mind showed her the geometry of it. By the time she made noise, he'd already be dead, and whoever was waiting in the hallway would have questions about why the maid was screaming, Why she'd noticed, why she'd cared. She was 3 feet away. The tray was heavy. The water was ice cold. Her foot caught didn't catch, but would look like it had caught on the edge of the carpet. The stumble was perfect, the kind of clumsy accident that happened to tired people at the end of long shifts. The tray tilted. The crystal tumbler launched forward. Ice water arced through the charged air like a silver blade. It hit Enzo Porro full in the chest. He jerked backward with a sharp intake of breath, shock overriding everything else, the phone call, the power, the carefully maintained composure. His body did what bodies do when drenched in ice water. It recoiled. The red dot kissed the empty air where his head had been. The window shattered. The bullet punched through supposedly bulletproof glass like it was tissue paper, and the world became a constellation of falling diamonds. Helena felt Enzo's hand surprisingly strong, surprisingly fast, close around her wrist and yank her down. They hit the floor together as shards rained around them, each piece catching the city lights and scattering them across marble like broken stars. Her cheek pressed against cold stone. She could smell his cologne, something expensive that probably had a French name mixed with ozone from the storm and her own fear sweat. The phone had skittered away, still glowing. Outside, the rain howled through the new wound in the penthouse's perfect shell. Silence, except for the storm. No second shot. No footsteps. Just the ragged sound of 2 people breathing. Enzo Porro moved, like someone who'd been in situations before, situations where staying still meant dying. He shifted his weight, keeping low, putting the massive desk between them and the shattered window. His hand was still locked around her wrist, and Helena realized with a sick jolt that he could feel her pulse hammering against his fingers. Evidence. Witnesses in the bloodstream. Stay down, he said. But he was already rising to a crouch, scanning the room with eyes that had gone from businessman to something else entirely. Something older. Something that understood violence not as an abstract concept but as a language he spoke fluently. He looked at the window, at the angle, at the trajectory. His jaw tightened. Then he looked at her. Really looked at her. Maybe for the first time in 6 months, and she watched his mind work through the mathematics of the last 60 seconds. The water. The stumble that wasn't a stumble. The timing that was too perfect to be accidental. Water still dripped from his shirt, from his hair, running down his face like he'd just surfaced from drowning. But his eyes were desert dry and absolutely focused. You saw it, he said. Not a question. Helena's throat closed. She'd spent 6 months perfecting invisibility, and now she was the most visible thing in the room. More visible than the shattered window, more visible than the bullet hole in the wall behind where his head had been. The laser sight, Enzo continued, his voice soft and terrible. In the glass. You saw the red dot and you moved. He was still crouched beside her, still holding her wrist, and she could feel the decision forming in him what to do about the maid who'd seen too much, who'd moved too fast, who'd cared too much about keeping him alive. His first words came out measured, each one dropping into the silence like a stone into deep water. You saved my life. A pause that lasted forever. Why? The penthouse filled with men in dark suits within minutes too fast. Helena thought distantly. For anyone who'd actually called 911, these weren't police, they were Enzo's people, moving with the quiet efficiency of a pit crew, already extracting the bullet from the wall, already photographing trajectories, already making the shattered window look like storm damage instead of attempted murder. Helena sat in a wingback chair someone had pushed her into, a blanket around her shoulders she didn't remember accepting. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She watched Enzo across the room, phone pressed to his ear, his wet shirt clinging to his frame as he orchestrated something complex and invisible. Every few seconds his eyes would flick to her, calculating, reassessing. No police, he said into the phone. Sharp. Final. Handle it internally. A man appeared at her elbow, late 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had seen things and filed them away for later use. Miss Banks, I'm going to need you to come with me. Helena's pulse kicked. This was it. This was where helpful maids who knew too much disappeared into the Hudson wearing concrete shoes, or whatever it was, men like Enzo Porro did to loose ends. Andrea. Enzo's voice cut across the room. The gray-haired man straightened slightly, and Helena recognized him, then the nervous cough in the hallway, the fear that had radiated through the door. He'd known, he'd been positioned, waiting, and he'd known something was wrong. Enzo crossed to them, glass crunching under his shoes. Up close, she could see the places where his composure had cracked a muscle jumping in his jaw, the white-knuckled grip on his phone. He'd come within an inch of dying. Men like him weren't supposed to come that close. The debt she created, Enzo said, looking at Andrea but clearly speaking for Helena's benefit, is now mine. She doesn't exist for the authorities. She was never here tonight. Clear? Yes, sir. And Andrea? Enzo's eyes found Helena's, pinning her in place. I don't forget debts. And I protect what's mine. The words landed like a brand. Not a promise, a claim. 20 minutes later, Helena sat in the back of a black Mercedes, watching her carefully constructed anonymity dissolve in the rearview mirror. Andrea drove in silence through rain-slicked streets, taking turns she couldn't track, until they pulled up to a building in Tribeca that screamed security and money in equal measures. 17th floor, Andrea said, handing her a key card. Don't leave without calling me first. Don't talk to anyone. Don't exist, Helena finished quietly. He almost smiled. You're learning. The apartment was beautiful. Soulless and beautiful, like everything else in Enzo Porro's world. Helena stood at the window, looking out at a city where she'd planned to disappear, and understood with perfect clarity. Her dream of anonymity hadn't just died tonight. It had been murdered, and she'd pulled the trigger herself. Morning light filtered through bulletproof windows. Helena had checked turning the Tribeca apartment into a gilded cage. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that red dot, steady as a heartbeat, kissing Enzo Porro's forehead in the glass. The knock came at 8 sharp. Andrea, with coffee she didn't want, and a suit bag she definitely didn't want. Mr. Porro will be here in 30 minutes. You should change. The suit was her size, charcoal gray, expensive. The kind of thing that made you invisible in boardrooms the way a maid's uniform made you invisible in penthouses. Different costume. Same disappearing act. She put it on because she understood by now that refusing wasn't actually an option. Enzo arrived exactly on time, looking like he'd slept 8 hours and spent the morning at the gym, instead of nearly getting his head blown off. The only tell was his eyes, watchful in a way that suggested he'd spent the night doing the same calculations she had, gaming out scenarios, counting exits. You're wondering if I'm going to kill you, he said, settling into the chair across from her like they were discussing stock portfolios instead of mortality. Helena's hands steadied around her coffee cup. Are you? If I wanted you dead, you'd have died last night. Cleanly. Professionally. You'd have been collateral damage from the assassination attempt tragic Maid, in the wrong place at the wrong time. He said it without inflection, just stating facts. But you saved my life. That creates complications. Complications. The word tasted bitter. The people who sent that shooter now know someone interfered. They'll review surveillance, do their homework. Eventually, they'll identify you. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and she caught a glimpse of something raw beneath the polish. You're a loose end, Miss Banks. And loose ends in my world don't live long enough to collect retirement. The fear she'd been holding at bay since last night crystallized into something sharp and cold in her chest. I'm offering you 2 choices. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. Option 1, $500,000. Wired to any account you want. New identity papers. A flight to anywhere that doesn't extradite. You leave today. You never come back. Helena stared at the envelope. More money than she'd dreamed of saving. Freedom. Anonymity. What's option 2? You work for me, directly. I pay you $200,000 a year, plus housing, security, everything you need. You'll be safe because you'll be mine, and people know better than to touch what belongs to me. His eyes held hers. But you'll never truly be free. Not from me. Not from this world. She should take the money. Should run. Should disappear into whatever life $500,000 could buy. But running meant looking over her shoulder forever. Running meant being prey. I'll take option 2, Helena heard herself say. Enzo smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Welcome to the family, Miss Banks. 3 months later, Helena sat in a conference room worth more than most people's houses and told 5 men in $1,000 suits that their quarterly projections were bullshit. The Singapore expansion is bleeding capital, she said, tapping her tablet to throw numbers onto the screen. You're 3 weeks behind schedule and $2 million over budget. Either you fix the supply chain issues or we pull out before it becomes a sinkhole. Silence. The kind that came from men unaccustomed to being contradicted. especially by someone who'd been scrubbing toilets half a year ago. Enzo leaned back in his chair at the head of the table, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Gentlemen? The man from acquisitions cleared his throat. Miss Banks is technically correct. We've had some complications with. Fix it, Enzo said. You have 1 week. Helena will audit your books personally. The meeting dissolved. Men filed out, some nodding respectfully to her, others avoiding eye contact entirely. She'd learned to read the difference. The ones who nodded saw competence. The ones who looked away saw a threat they didn't know how to neutralize. She'd stopped being invisible the night she threw that water. Now she was something more dangerous, indispensable. The work came naturally. Organizing Enzo's labyrinthine business empire required the same attention to detail as managing a 17-bedroom penthouse, just with higher stakes and better pay. She tracked his legitimate ventures, real estate holdings, import-export companies, a chain of upscale restaurants. She didn't ask about the rest. Didn't need to. The spaces between the legitimate businesses told their own story. Negative space sketching out an empire built on things that happened in the dark. You're good at this, Enzo said after the room emptied. They'd fallen into this rhythm debriefs after meetings. Just the two of them, where he'd test her thinking, and she'd push back when his instincts missed details her precision caught. I'm good at seeing patterns, Helena corrected. You're good at deciding what to do about them. A genuine partnership, then. He said it like he was surprised to find himself in one. The door opened. Andrea stepped through, moving with that careful economy of motion that suggested violence held on a very short leash. He set a folder on the table, latest security reports. She knew without asking, and his eyes found hers. Cold. Assessing. He'd been professional these past months. Efficient. Always exactly where he needed to be. Doing exactly what needed doing. But Helena had learned to read the spaces between actions too, and in those spaces, Andrea radiated a resentment so pure it had its own gravity. The Castellano meeting is confirmed for Thursday, he said to Enzo, ignoring her completely. I've arranged the usual precautions. Helena will attend, Enzo said. Andrea's jaw tightened. That's not protocol. It is now. Something passed between them, a challenge, maybe, or a reminder of hierarchy. Andrea's eyes flicked to Helena one last time, and she saw it clearly. He'd been the right hand, the trusted one. The lieutenant who'd stood beside Enzo for 15 years, until a maid threw a glass of water and changed everything. Helena found the discrepancy at 2 a.m, hunched over her laptop in the Tribeca apartment with cold coffee and spreadsheets that should have been simple but weren't. Security expenses, Andrea's domain, monthly payments to a consulting firm called Apex Strategic Solutions. Nothing remarkable except that Apex didn't exist. She'd checked. The business registration was real, filed properly, taxes paid. But there were no employees, no office, no digital footprint beyond the bare minimum required to cash checks. $40,000 a month for 3 years, nearly $1.5 million flowing into a ghost company. She cross-referenced the payment dates with her calendar, the meticulous one she'd started keeping, tracking Enzo's movements, his meetings, his close calls. Every payment coincided with a security failure. Nothing catastrophic, just small gaps, windows of vulnerability. Like the night someone knew exactly where Enzo would be standing, exactly when, exactly which window had the clearest shot. Her hands went cold. Andrea had been in the hallway, waiting, nervous. He'd positioned himself there, she'd thought at the time, because he knew something was wrong. But what if he'd been there because he'd orchestrated it? What if the nervous cough hadn't been fear for Enzo's life, but fear that the plan was falling apart? She reached for her phone to call Enzo, but it buzzed first. His name on the screen, situation developing in Red Hook. His voice clipped, already moving. Don't wait up, Enzo. I need to. Tomorrow, Helena. It can't wait. The line went dead. She sat, staring at the spreadsheet, watching the numbers blur. Tomorrow might be too late. If Andrea was the leak, if he'd set up that first assassination attempt, then whatever was happening in Red Hook right now. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Miss Banks. The voice was digitally distorted, mechanical. Your employer is walking into a trap. Pier 47, Red Hook. Andrea's people are waiting. If you want him to see sunrise, you come alone. You have 40 minutes. Who is this? Someone who'd prefer Mr. Porro alive. The warehouse at the end of the pier. Come alone, or don't come at all. The line died. Helena's mind raced. This could be the trap. She could be the one walking into an ambush, the loose end finally getting tied off. Or Enzo could be 40 minutes away from a bullet that Andrea had spent 3 years and $1.5 million arranging. She looked at the spreadsheet one more time. The pattern was too clean, too deliberate. Andrea had been bleeding the organization slowly, methodically, while positioning himself as the loyal lieutenant, the perfect inside man. She grabbed her coat, her phone, and the small canister of pepper spray Andrea's security training had insisted she carry. 38 minutes to Pier 47. She didn't call anyone, didn't leave a note. If this was wrong, if she was walking into her own execution, at least she'd die trying to repay the debt. The city blurred past the taxi windows, and Helena realized she'd stopped running toward anonymity months ago. Now she was running toward something infinitely more dangerous. A man who'd claimed her as his, and a loyalty she hadn't meant to feel but couldn't seem to shake. The taxi dropped her 3 blocks away because the driver took one look at Pier 47 and refused to go closer. Helena didn't blame him. This part of Red Hook looked like the city had given up on it years ago: rusted chain link, broken streetlights, warehouses that hadn't seen legitimate cargo since the 90s. She'd slipped her security detail by the simple expedient of being smarter than them. They watched the front door. She took the service elevator to the basement and walked out through the parking garage. Old skills from a life spent being invisible. The warehouse at the end of the pier loomed against the black water, windows shattered like missing teeth. No lights, no movement. Every instinct Helena had developed over 6 months of surviving in Enzo's world screamed at her to run. She stepped inside anyway, punctual. Andrea's voice came from the darkness. I always appreciated that about you. Lights blazed on, blinding. Helena's hand went up instinctively, and when her vision cleared, Andrea stood 20 feet away, flanked by 2 men she didn't recognize. Not Enzo's people, mercenaries, probably. The kind who got paid regardless of which side won. Where's Enzo? She demanded. 30 minutes out. Dealing with a fire at one of his restaurants, very sudden, very convenient. Andrea smiled, and it was worse than his usual cold neutrality. He'll come when I tell him you're in danger. He's predictable that way now, ever since you made him soft. Her phone buzzed. Enzo's name on the screen. Answer it, Andrea said. Speakerphone. And Helena? Remember that cooperation keeps you breathing. She thumbed the answer button. Andrea's gun steady on her forehead, a mirror of that red dot 3 months ago. Except this time there was no water to throw. No instinct that would save anyone. Helena, where the hell are you? Enzo's voice was tight with something that might have been fear. Your security detail says you slipped them. I'm sorry, she said, keeping her voice steady. I found something in the books. Apex Strategic Solutions, the consulting firm. It doesn't exist. Silence on the line. Then, what are you talking about? $40,000 a month for 3 years. She held Andrea's gaze, watching his eyes narrow. The payments started right after you promoted someone to head of security. Same someone who handles all your protection details. Andrea's finger tightened on the trigger. Hang up. I'm at Pier 47. Helena continued, speaking faster. The warehouse at the end. Andrea says hello. You clever little... Andrea started. The line was already dead, but Helena had heard it in Enzo's sharp intake of breath, the split second before he disconnected. He understood. The manufactured emergency. The convenient isolation. The 3-year setup that had culminated in one maid throwing water and ruining everything. He's not coming alone, Helena said. Neither am I. Andrea gestured, and 4 more men emerged from the shadows. I've had 3 years to plan this. Your boss has had 3 minutes. 12 minutes later, the warehouse doors exploded inward. What followed happened in seconds that felt like hours. Muzzle flashes painting the warehouse in strobe light violence, the percussion of gunfire echoing off concrete and water. Helena hit the ground as Andrea's men scattered. Their carefully laid ambush, collapsing under the weight of Enzo's entire security apparatus, descending like the wrath of God. Andrea made it to the back exit. Almost. Enzo caught him at the door. And whatever happened in those final moments, Helena didn't see. She was too busy being pulled to safety by men in tactical gear who'd appeared from nowhere, ghosts made solid. When the gunfire stopped, Andrea wasn't breathing anymore. Neither were 3 of his mercenaries. The 4th was on his knees, hands zip-tied, already talking. Enzo found her in the aftermath, his face streaked with cordite and fury. He didn't speak, just pulled her against him hard enough to hurt, his hand fisted in her hair, his heart hammering against her cheek. "Don't ever," he said into her hair, "run toward danger alone again. Then don't walk into traps without me," she whispered back. He laughed sharp, almost broken. "Deal." 2 years later, Helena stood in a Milan hotel suite that cost more per night than her old studio apartment cost per month, and watched Enzo negotiate with real estate developers in rapid Italian. The view stretched across the Duomo, all Gothic spires and impossible ambition, the kind of beauty that didn't apologize for taking up space. She'd stopped apologizing too. The transition had been brutal, systematically dismantling the empire's darker foundations, pivoting everything into legitimate channels. Import, export with actual manifests, real estate without the money laundering, restaurants that only served food. Some of Enzo's old associates had objected. Those objections had been handled quietly, permanently, and Helena had learned not to ask for details she didn't need. Her engagement ring caught the Italian sunlight. 3 carats of ethically sourced diamonds because even their jewelry had to be legitimate now. She twisted it absently, remembering a different woman in a gray uniform who dreamed of saving $47,000 and disappearing. That woman had saved a life instead and found she couldn't disappear from her own anymore. "Penny for your thoughts," Enzo said, materializing at her shoulder the way he did, silent as a panther despite his size. "Thinking about red dots," Helena said. "And choices." He knew what she meant. He always did now. Regrets? She looked at him, this man who'd claimed her as his own, who'd given her power instead of prison, who'd kept every promise, including the one about never being truly free. She thought about the board meetings where CEOs listened when she spoke, the empire they were building, brick by legitimate brick, the life she'd found by risking everything. "Not even one," Helena said, and meant it. Enzo smiled and pulled her close, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang across a city that had been rebuilding itself for centuries, always rising from its own ruins into something stronger, just like her. If this story moved you, take a moment, like the video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching.